Hey, I'm Vix Too Much, and welcome to this video. Today we continue our in-depth look into Dead Space by looking at Dead Space 2, the game that continued the journey into Dead Space and proved that the first game was not just a fluke, but an actual legit horror franchise. Let's take a closer look.
I've done. Take it easy, buddy.
People were cautiously optimistic for the first Dead Space because it was an unproven game. Sure, it looked great, and the idea of strategic dismemberment against the disgusting yet intriguing enemies known as the Necromorphs looked to be a refreshing take on sci-fi horror, but people were still cautious because the original Dead Space could end up like a failed Resident Evil 4 clone. Thankfully, those worries went out the window once the game was released, and not only was the first Dead Space a success, people wanted more. Dead Space 2 was met with great anticipation, and when it came out, fans and newcomers alike welcomed it with open arms. Gone was the cautious optimism that followed the first game. This time, people were anxious to see what new things Dead Space 2 brought to this new franchise. Dead Space 2 does its predecessor justice by making a lot of small tweaks and a few big changes that makes this sequel surpass its predecessor in key areas where the original had a few missteps. Gone are the creepy but familiar looking areas of the Ishimura. Now, Dead Space 2 takes place on the Sprawl, a space station located on Titan, one of Saturn's moons. The Sprawl is completely different from the Ishimura because the game drives the point that the Sprawl is a place where people don't just work, they have lives. Sure, the Ishimura was also a place where people lived, but the stories of individuals you heard on the Ishimura were all about work. No one in their right mind would ever want to live on the Ishimura because everything is business, everything is monotonous, and everything is a grind with nothing changing. The Sprawl, on the other hand, is an enormous living facility where kids can go to school, adults can buy apartments, people can go to work, and if you're bored, you can go shopping and do fun things like normal everyday activities. It is a nice futuristic vision of everyday life if humanity is ever able to colonize the moons of other planets in our solar system, and it's this little details of how people live on the Sprawl that make it feel like a real place. There are also nice details here and there that give homage to how people used to see the future in sci-fi movies such as Event Horizon. This adds to the horror when a necromorph outbreak happens on the Sprawl because, for at least the beginning of the game, you see how people react in complete shock as many try to escape while watching others fall victim to the necromorphs, in very gory ways. It really takes the horror to a whole new level seeing normal people freak the fuck out when attacked by necromorphs because in many ways it shows you exactly how people would react if something like this were to happen in real life. And that's basically the idea of horror. Horror always presents you with an exaggerated example of fear and says, oh, this would never happen. There is no way this will ever happen. Not in a million years. This is completely outside the realm of possibility or reality. But what if it did? Dead Space 2 does a hell of a job telling you exactly what can happen if necromorphs infested a large area full of people, as you see people cradling wounded or dead loved ones, see people forced to abandon others to save themselves, and even hear a heart-wrenching audio log of a mother forced to kill her baby and blaming her husband out of grief. I mean, sure, we saw this in Dead Space Extraction, but Extraction was an on-rail shooter, so you didn't have control of movement. This is the first time it happens with a main game in the series, and the first time you see Isaac react to what is happening around him. Isaac Clarke is back, 3 years after the events of the first game, and he barely remembers anything that has happened between that time. Unfortunately, he doesn't have time to figure out just yet because now he is stuck in the Sprawl infested with necromorphs, and once again, he needs to figure out how to escape, or maybe even how to stop the necromorph outbreak. Isaac has had a lot of change done to him since the last game. He has a voice, and more important than that, he has a character. Isaac Clarke is no longer the player's avatar like in the first game. This time, you play as Isaac Clarke, and you learn from him, his stories, his struggles, and his inner demons. Isaac Clarke can barely remember anything that happened to him in the 3 years after the events of the first game. Apparently, he was found floating in his escape pod by EarthGov, a shady and mysterious organization that is some sort of government for places like the Sprawl that are outside of Earth and they put him in a stasis-like coma to question him about his knowledge of the marker. The game starts out with Isaac being interrogated about his ordeal in the Ishimura. From the very beginning, Isaac has hallucinations of a bloodied and mutilated Nicole that serves as a manifestation of his guilt for not being able to save her. One of the reasons that Isaac is an interesting character is that you see him battle his inner demons, mainly his guilt over Nicole's death. Throughout many parts of the game, you see Isaac's hallucinations of Nicole blaming him for her death and reminding him that he failed to protect her. Isaac's guilt is also exacerbated by the fact that he was the one who supported Nicole joining the Ishimura, as he saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her. Besides his guilt, Isaac is pretty much a normal guy, stuck in an extraordinary situation, just like in the first game. Not surprisingly, Isaac is always suspect of anyone trying to help him because he has been double-crossed before. During the first quarter of the game, you are helped by Dinah, a mysterious woman with a vague interest in you. You don't know much about her other than she is the only one not trying to kill Isaac. Making your way to meet up with Dinah gives the unitology aspect of Dead Space a hell of a lot more lore if you take the time to read text logs, explore the environment, and listen to a few audio tours. You actually visit a unitology church/museum and learn about their beliefs. Apparently, Michael Altman is this religion's version of a Jesus Christ or Buddha, which gives this fictitious religion more believability. There have been serious articles by gaming journalists that study in depth the unitology aspect of Dead Space 2 and compare it to the real-world religion of Scientology. Ben Kuchera, a journalist for Ars Technica, points out all the similarities that make Dead Space 2 a critique on the real-world and controversial religion of Scientology. Ben Kuchera points out that Unitology has a class system for its members that moves up the more money you give to the church, just like Scientology. Unitology has powerful political figures and celebrities that try to make the religion acceptable for the mainstream audience, just like Scientology. Ben Kuchera even went as far as getting images from Unitology in the game and puts them side by side with images from Scientology, and the resemblances are hard to deny. There's also the idea of convergence or unification in both Unitology and Scientology, with Unitology taking the idea of convergence to a terrifying level with the Necromorphs. The developers have been dodgy about whether Unitology is a critique on Scientology, with the creative director of Dead Space 2, Wright Bagwell, saying, quote, "We never really approached the discussion with the intention of poking fun at a particular religion, or sort of making a social statement about something that's going on right now. For us, Unitology's purpose in the story presents people's illogical thinking about things they don't understand. It was never really intended to jab at any particular religion." End quote. This is a safe and professional answer to give, and it reemphasizes a strong critique I made of the dangers of fanatical and blind beliefs seen in the first game. It would have been great if Dead Space 2's story continued down this subtle religious critique of beliefs going out of control and the dangers of it being unchecked. I say it would have been great because unfortunately the game drops this story bit entirely less than a quarter way through the game. Once you finally meet up face to face with Dinah, she turns out to be a Unitologist and gives you a stereotypical horror-esque monologue as she explains that Unitology needs Isaac to make more markers to serve their twisted view that the Necromorphs are the next step in human evolution and convergence. Turns out that during his coma, EarthGov made Isaac build a marker because in some way the marker from the previous game imprinted some sort of weird alien message in his brain that allows him to build these things. EarthGov wants what Isaac knows for power, Unitology wants it for religion. Having Isaac battling the Unitology fanatics along with a corrupt government organization would have been an interesting three-way fight. But when Dana and her cronies are about to take Isaac away, she is unceremoniously killed, and now you only have EarthGov and its leader Tideman to deal with. Now, Tideman is a serviceable bad guy, but he's a corrupt government bigwig trying to stop Clark from accomplishing his goal. We've seen this done 1,000 times before, and it's not special in Dead Space 2. It's just a little more frustrating here because the Unitology aspect is still very interesting, yet almost completely dropped once Dana is out of the picture. The only thing unitology related from that point on is Isaac's mission to destroy the marker. Okay, so you might be stuck with a bland bad guy for 3/4 of the game, but thankfully Tideman is not the only character you'll interact with. The Sprawl might be empty once most of its inhabitants evacuate or become victims to the Necromorphs, but you'll find a few stragglers along the way. The first person is a guy named Nolan Strauss, who was one of the main characters in the Dead Space Aftermath animated movie that served as a prequel for Dead Space 2. Strauss is mainly used as exposition for what Isaac needs to do so he can destroy the marker because, just like Isaac, he has been exposed to the marker in a way that gives him knowledge on how to build them and how to destroy them. However, unlike Isaac, Strauss slips in and out of reality, and sometimes it works, and other times not so much. Strauss has been through a lot of shit, and the Aftermath animated movie shows that he accidentally killed his family while under the influence of the marker. But some of his breakdowns don't elicit sympathy, not from me anyway, because half of the time he comes off as a whiny little bitch. There's really no other way I can explain it, and many of the situations where Ellie and Isaac are in danger, Strauss is just useless, which makes his story bits kind of frustrating. The only silver lining here is that this makes Strauss's death scene very satisfying, though once he's out of the picture, it sort of proves he was a useless character to begin with the exception of a few story bits here and there. Thankfully, another one of the characters you'll meet is Ellie Langford, a no-nonsense individual who is skeptical of Isaac at first, but eventually warms up to him. Ellie can hold her own against the Necromorphs, and basically serves as Strauss's bodyguard up until the point he goes insane. Ellie is great because she never really needs Isaac, and has a sassy attitude about her that works to contrast the situation she finds herself in. She even fights off Strauss when the moron literally rips one of her eyes out and shows no sympathy once he dies. In a hilarious moment of badassery, Ellie and Isaac find a giant futuristic bulldozer and rip through Necromorph-infested territory. When they finally reach their goal, Ellie crashes through the EarthGov headquarters with Isaac still on top of the bulldozer. Ellie knows that this would hurt Isaac, but she also knew that Isaac would be alright. What's a few more scratches and bruises once you already went through hordes and hordes of Necromorphs, right? The Necromorphs themselves also become characters of their own, as the Sprawl is a setting that allows for more creative freedom. All the Necromorphs from the previous game are back, but you get new variations such as the Pack, who are Necromorphs that have infected children and run at Isaac with a deafening screech as they try to overwhelm you in numbers. The Pack are weak individually, one shot from any of your weapons can put them down for good, but there are so many of them that you better be on your toes when you hear their screams, otherwise you're going to be overwhelmed. They act a lot like the Flood from Halo in this regard. The fact that Necromorphs don't discriminate against infecting children makes them more frightening than they already are, and when the Necromorphs use children as a horde, it shows that they aren't just mindless killing machines. You even get a Necromorph variation that has infected babies, turning their small bodies into yellow pulsating sacs that will explode if you get too close. All of this is fucked up in the best way possible. Other new Necromorph types are added for more terrifying ways you can meet your death. There's the Puker, who very obviously throws sticky balls of bile at you, not just to hurt you, but also to physically slow you down, as Isaac's movement becomes limited if the Puker successfully hits you with one of its vomit projectiles. This can put you in a very tight spot if you have other Necromorphs trying to cut you apart. The Stalkers are Necromorphs that hide in corners and make sounds very similar to the Velociraptors from Jurassic Park, as they size Isaac up before charging headfirst and ramming you if you don't act quickly enough. The Necromorphs from the previous game are a lot more aggressive. The Leapers can now swipe at you mid-air and even learn the advantage of attacking and retreating, taking bits of health away from Isaac until he puts them down or they put him down. The Necromorphs have more offensive ways to kill Isaac, but Isaac has new offensive moves of his own. One of the most useful is the ability to use the razor-sharp claws of defeated Necromorphs with your Kinesis module and hurl them as javelins to impale your enemies on walls. There are also new tools, including one called, ironically, the Javelin, that shoots steel harpoons, and while it acts as a powerful weapon, it's still technically a tool. At this point, Isaac has learned a thing or two about dismembering necromorphs, so he isn't as helpless as in the first game. But he's still human, and very mentally fragile thanks to the marker that he built continuously fucking with him like in the previous game. This helps keeps a good balance in Dead Space 2 between horror and action. One of the few criticisms of this game is that some sections feel like they lean more towards action than the first game. While it is true that you get more action set pieces in Dead Space 2, they feel earned and they don't come at the expense of the horror. In other words, before you get a 3-minute Michael Bay action sequence where you blow something up, you already spend at least an hour beforehand in tense, smaller scale battles with necromorphs that still force you to pay attention to your ammo and resources so you don't run into an impossible situation later. The action in this game is more like a reward for the player. It's like the game is saying, congratulations, you survived going through stores, hallways, apartments filled with necromorphs. Now, here's a big ass necromorph that tears apart half of the room that you can only defeat by blowing up a space helicopter. While the pace might be a little off, the spectacle is undeniably fun and awesome to look at. Not to mention that every time you survive, you can't help but feel like King Big Dick of Murder Mountain. It's also great that Visceral didn't go overboard with its action sequences. Well, not in this game anyway. Dead Space 2 proved that the first game was not a fluke, and with people praising the second game left and right, a third game was inevitable. All that needed to happen now was for the series to refine its balance of horror and action and make a solid Dead Space trilogy. That shouldn't have been too hard. I mean, right? Dead Space fans would have to wait a little over 2 years before the third game would come out. But in the meantime, a DLC for Dead Space 2 called Severed came as an appetizer to hold off Dead Space fans for a bit. Dead Space 2 Severed is a great, albeit short, piece of DLC that tells the story of Gabe Weller and Lexine Murdoch, who were two of the main characters in the spin-off game Dead Space Extraction, and the only ones to survive the events of that game. The DLC itself is terribly priced at $7, and it's more geared towards the people who actually care about the characters or side stories of the Dead Space universe. But if you want a short but sweet campaign story of Dead Space 2 told through a different but intriguing perspective, then Severed fits the bill. In Severed, Gabe and Lexine are married, and the whole DLC is basically a race against time as Gabe runs through the sprawl to get to his wife and escape as the Necromorph outbreak is going on. Severed takes place concurrently with the main game, time-wise, and while you'll see new areas of the sprawl, you'll mainly go through the same places as in the main game, but from a different perspective. This might seem cheap at first, but in reality, it gives the sprawl a bigger definition of place. For one thing, your main character, Gabe Weller, works as a security guard for the sprawl, and while the story threads of what happened after Dead Space Extraction are kept to a minimum, you do get a sense that Gabe and Lexine made a home for themselves in the sprawl, at least for a few years. It's funny at first to see Gabe and Lexine as a married couple, because anyone who played Dead Space Extraction will remember that Gabe wasn't too fond of Lexine since he was a tough-as-nails security guard and even saw her as a liability as he tried to escape with other characters in the events of Extraction. However, he and Lexine are the only ones who escape the events of Extraction, and it's easy to believe that surviving these types of traumatizing events can bring people together, even individuals with different personalities as Gabe and Lexine. Severed also does a great job at presenting a different perspective of the Necromorph outbreak from the beginning of the main game because you play as one of the people who simply want to escape the sprawl. Lexine will constantly communicate with her husband over the comms, and you can hear all the commotion and chaos in the background as she tries to escape. Gabe might be a hard-ass, but now he's a hard-ass with a wife and a baby on the way, and you can bet your ass he will move land, sea, and air to protect the ones he loves. Due to this, Gabe and Lexine become very likable characters, which is quite the accomplishment for how short this DLC is. The gameplay here is the same as in the main game, with a bigger focus on action, and that's okay. What is not okay is the fact that you can't play Severed again through New Game Plus mode once you finish it. When I say Severed is short, it's short. You'll be lucky if the campaign lasts you more than 3 hours, and that is if you play on the hardest difficulty and take your time to explore for hidden resources. It's a dick move to pull on people who have bought this DLC because Severed makes it seem like you can play it over in New Game Plus. Power nodes are available, and all the weapons from the main game are available for purchase as well, though that obviously can't happen with just one playthrough. This might be a big reason why people have decided to pass on this DLC, which is a shame because besides this obvious oversight, Severed is still a great little journey through the terrifying environments of the Sprawl. The ending is also very well done, fitting for a horror game. But people wanted Dead Space 3, and when they finally got it, it would divide people as to whether it was any good or whether Dead Space 3 missed the point of Dead Space entirely. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Be on the lookout of the final part of this series as we finally discuss the fall of Dead Space. Thanks again, and please share this video with your friends and subscribe. I could always use some new fans. I'll see you all real soon.